If you look at the person, we have the head and we have the body. The head we very naturally associate with the higher faculties of the human being, the intellect, the brain. And so the direction of the whole body, and indeed to some extent the life force of the physical body, comes from the brain. The body, of course, is what carries out the instructions and the guidelines coming from the brain. So the head represents truly this higher aspect. Spiritually, this would be the spiritual aspect, the elevated, uncorrupted essence of God's presence, of the soul as connected to God. And the body is more the physicality, void of that intellectual, spiritual content. Now the head is this higher element, but it is not the goal of our mission on earth. The goal is to draw from the head and bring that higher level of existence, of consciousness, of spirituality into the bodily, into the material represented by the rest of the body. And that is this translation from the upper to the lower, this fusion that is created, which is represented by the neck. The neck contains the esophagus and the trachea. Indeed, the sustenance of the body, and as well as the very life of the body, is going through the neck. And digressing from the scientific aspect, even as you look at the individual as he appears, you have this narrow area connecting the head and the body. So the neck represents fusing and drawing from higher into lower. And this is the unique aspect of Judaism, which is not about simply enthroning or glorifying the spiritual and saying how great it is, but leaving the material unaffected and uninfluenced by it. But rather the whole idea is to draw down from the higher, from the spiritual, from the elevated, and have it permeate the lower, cruder, hitherto aspects. And that is exactly what the temple is. Although God is certainly infinite. Indeed, Solomon wondered, as it's quoted in Kings, the book of Kings, even the heavens and the heavens of the heavens cannot contain you. Can this house that I'm building? It's a rhetorical question, and yet we know that the house of God is the receptacle for the divine presence, because even though God does transcend the finite, but he also transcends the infinite, and he chose that a specific location on the planet Earth be the place where his divine presence is most revealed, and that was the place of the temple. So the idea of the temple is not per se about spirituality. God existed before the temple was built. God is there before the world was created. So there is God, who is this higher level, the highest, very highest level, and everything that godliness represents. And then there is this quantum leap, this contraction, tzimtzum, as it's called in Kabbalah. This crude world which conceals godliness surely does not convince us unequivocally of God's existence. On the contrary, world, olam, which also means helam, concealment, does not betray necessarily the existence of God. And the mission and the whole challenge is to draw from the higher godly level and bring it into the earthly. And that is what the temple is. And that is why the temple is called a neck, because it's that which connects the upper and the lower. And indeed, when the temple was commanded, the first commandment, you shall make for me a holy place, and I will dwell within them, as the Shalah HaKadosh, the Rabbi Shaya Horowitz, points out, it doesn't say, I will dwell within it, but within them. For each individual is also a temple. And his goal is not merely to know of the existence of this pure soul connected to God, but to see to it that the soul influences directly and engages with his bodily so that his whole being becomes permeated and influenced by the spirituality of his soul. Now, having said that, let's move to the reunion of Jacob and then ask a couple of questions. When Jacob finally comes, says, chapter 46, verse 29, Joseph harnessed his chariot, went up to meet Israel, his father, in Goshen. He appeared before him, fell on his neck, and he wept on his neck excessively. Joseph wept on the neck of Jacob. But Jacob doesn't say anything about his weeping. It's an obvious question. Rashi answers a question, again citing the Talmud, that Jacob did not cry at that moment because he was reciting Shema, the Kriyat Shema. We come across the Shema, by the way, a few times before the giving of the Torah. It should not be a surprise. Not everything that was in the Torah did not exist before. Many things were there. And so apparently this declaration of God's unity also was something that was known. And it was time to recite Shema, and Jacob did so even though there was the enormous emotionality of this moment. He said the Shema. But this is Rashi's answer drawn from the Talmud as to why we don't find Jacob crying, but does it not create more questions than it answers, maybe? Didn't Yosef want to say Shema, or couldn't he say Shema a little later, or maybe say Shema while he was weeping? What exactly is going on here? Apropos of that point in general, there's another point that's made, a very powerful one, that sometimes when there's a deeply emotional experience, for individuals who the focus of their whole life is a relationship with God, they try to utilize all of their human experiences and redirect them towards enhancing and strengthening the relationship with God and their spiritual existence. And so when this powerful emotional moment occurred with the reunion of his long-lost son, rather than just enjoy it on a human level, he tried to sublimate it. He tried to, and succeeded in fact, of focusing it to something higher so that it would be perpetuated and connected to something truly eternal. There's a very lovely Hasidic story bringing out the same point of the fifth Rebbe of Lubavitch, Reb Sholem Dober, who passed away in 1920, and when his son Yosef Yitzchak was a little boy, later becoming the sixth Rebbe, who passed away in 1950. But not an unusual scene. He notices his little baby boy sleeping and felt he looked beautiful and angelic, and he felt, like many fathers do, a strong urge to give him a kiss. But he felt somehow that this urge, which is he would satisfy by giving him this kiss and expressing this affection, but he felt something deeper could be accomplished if he could somehow redirect the energy of this emotion. And so he decided at that moment that he's going to write a Hasidic discourse called a Ma'amar as a gift for this son. He was not able to give him the gift till some years later when he was intellectually developed enough to understand it. But in these circles, to receive a gift of a Ma'amar from a Rebbe, both getting the manuscript, but the very fact that he says it was written for him was considered an enormous gift. And he, at that time, when he gave him this essay, explained to him the circumstances, that it was from the energy of the kiss that he wanted to give him. And indeed, this mimer later, which is still extant and printed, was nicknamed the Hasidic kiss. Not everybody is obviously on this level, but it is that same idea. So here too we have Jacob saying Shema. But why didn't he cry? Why didn't he fall? And again we have Joseph falling on the neck of of his father Yaakov. So we have three levels of crying here. We have Benjamin and Joseph crying and falling on the neck. We have the brothers, but not falling on the neck, and the absence of the mention of the neck leads the Talmud to the symbolism of the temples. And then we have Jacob, but not trying at all or falling on the neck. And so the Rebbe asks really two major questions here from which we can derive a very important lesson, and those are coming up in the very next segment.